We're on the top of Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, and you count down 7 lines. Rava Omar. So let's just review the last point so we know where we could take off. We had a machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim about how to divvy up the portions of the lechem aponim. There were 12 loaves of bread, 6 and 6, that were brought out every Shabbos onto the shulchan in the Heichal. And when they were taken away a week later, removed from the shulchan, they were divvied up. And now the Kohen Gadol, based on the principle that we learned in the previous Mishnah, has rights to say, I want my portion of the lechem aponim. And the machlokes was, how do we divvy up the loaves? According to Rebbe Shita, we divvy them up 50-50, which means that according to Rebbe, the Kohen Gadol has rights to take half of the 12, which means that he'll get 6 out of the 12 loaves. And the Chachamim disagree, and they said he can get 4 loaves or 5 loaves. He's got to get less than halfway, less than 50%. So the Gemara says, I understand that less than 50% in the case of 12 would be 5 loaves. Why? Because 6 loaves would be 50%, and less than that would be 5 loaves. Why 4 loaves? That's mentioned here in the Brisa. And the Gemara says that this is based on an assumption that there are 2 loaves of bread out of the 12 that are designated for those who take care of the Mikdash. They are what you call the Shomrim, and they deserve to be recognized. So we give them 2 loaves of bread, and then we're ending up dividing up the last 10 loaves of bread. So the Shomrim are called in the language of the Talmud, Hagofas Dolosos. In other words, when the day ended in the Beis HaMikdash and they were closing shop, these were the Shomrim who were in charge of locking up the doors of the Mikdash. And we want to give them credit and recognize them and their contribution, their tirch and their work. And we give them 2 loaves of the lechem aponim. It's not on the desk. Oh, excuse me for just 1 minute. Sorry. So then, after we designate those 2 loaves, we're down to 10. And if the Kohen could get half of those loaves, 50%, that's Rebbe Shita, he will take 5 out of the 10. If you go with the Chachamim, we drop him down to 4 so that he doesn't get half of those loaves. Now, the Gemara here, in the name of Rava Omar, Kula Rabbi Yehudahi. Rava wants to offer another interpretation of this brisa, an alternative interpretation, Rebbehi. Now, Rebbe holds he gets mechza, he gets half, so that I can justify this brisa if the Kohen Gadol gets 5 out of the 10 loaves that are divvied up. But why does the brisa say, if it goes according to Rebbe Shita, 4 loaves? That's less than 50%. And Rebbe said that the Kohen Gadol has rights to 50%. So Rava answers in a very, shall I say, innovative way, Savarla ki Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds, as we said before, that they only divided up 10 of the loaves because 2 were designated for the Magufe Dolosos, hagofas hadlosos, elamai arba. So now the question is, so what for? If we're divvying up 10 loaves of bread, then the Kohen Gadol has rights to 5 out of the 10, according to Rebbe, because Rebbe holds he gets mechzal mechz, he gets half. Hochamesh boy lemishkal. He should be getting 5. Why is he downgraded to 4? Lokash. Ha'de'ika mishmar hamis akev. Ha'deleka mishmar hamis akev. This is very interesting. We mentioned before that sometimes we recognize the extra effort of those who went beyond, like the Kohanim who would lock up the Mikdash at night, and we gave them an additional gift of two lechamim, 2 loaves of the lechem panim. Now we have another gift to divvy out, and we have another group of Kohanim that we want to recognize and give them a pat on the back. And this is called a mishmar hamisake, which means that they remained in Yerushalayim above and beyond the call of duty. They had completed their service, their rotation, but they nevertheless insisted on being misakev, on staying longer in Yerushalayim. For example, we'll give 1 or 2 examples. On each one of the 3 regalim, the mishmaros, that's the group, the brigade, so to speak, of Kohanim that are on duty, would come right before the regal. So let's say, for example, Yontif is on a Monday. One of the mishmaros decides to come early, and they show up already before Shabbos, 3 days early, to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. And they remain there until and beyond the regal. Or let's give another example. Let's say instead of Yontif on a Monday, Yontif is on a Thursday. And the Mishmeres should have actually come in on Thursday. And this Mishmeres, which would have been there from Thursday to Thursday and would have completed their store of duty on a Thursday, they decided to stay over Shabbos and added another 3 days at the end of their Mishmeres. So again, we have 2 options. Either they came early or they stayed late. In these cases, we're going to divvy out as a gift 2 chalos of the week's lechem aponim to this mishmar hamisake. Now what we're left with is, out of the original 12, we're down to 8. Why are we down to 8? We've given 2 to the magufei adlosos, another 2 now to the mishmeres hamishakeves, because they came early. They were like Alan would call it the yekis, who came early or came on time. We need more of those. Or they stayed later, and they were doing voluntary work on their own, which was not in the call of duty because their mishmeres was 1 week. They came 3 days earlier, or they stayed 3 days later. And therefore, what we're left with after 2 and 2 is 4 minus 12 is 8 chalas. And if, according to Rebbe, the Kohen Gadol has rights to 50% mechzal mechza, he'll take home 4 out of the 8 chalas. And in the case where the Brisa mentions that the Kohen Gadol gets 5 chalas, the leka mishmar misakev. It was a regular Shabbos in the middle of the year, and they divvied up the chalas exactly as they would do every single Shabbos. 2 chalas they subtracted and dedicated for the schar agofas losos. Now we're down to 10, and the Kohen Gadol took 4. So Ika Mishmar Hamisakev is then we're down to Shmona. Boiler Miflig, we have to divide it. And if we're down to Shmona, the Kohen Gadol takes, Shakil Arbi takes 4, he gets his mechza. Leka Mishmar Hamisakev. Then what we're left with is divvying up a full 10 chalas, and the Kohen Gadol Shakil Chamesh will take 4. So the Gemara says, Yihachi, if this brisa reflects the sheet of Rebbe, and sometimes the Kohen Gadol would get no more than 4 chalas if there was a mishmar misakev, why does it say at the end of the brisa, Rebbe Omer li olam chamesh. Rebbe says, no. See, the Brisa quotes Rebbe at the end. Rava wanted to say the entire Brisa was authored by Rebbe. But what is Rava going to do with the final closure of the Brisa when the Brisa ends up with a chasima, and in that seal it says that Rebbe says liolam chamesh, that the Kohen Gadol under all circumstances will take 5 out of the 10 chalas. So the Gemara answers kasha, and there's no clear answer to that question. All right, this was just to make a hashlama, a completion of what we started last week. And tonight's shir will focus on the new Mishnah. So for those who tuned in a little bit late, we're on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, and we're looking at the Mishnah, which is approximately 15 lines down, 10 lines down from the top. We're continuing now with our study of the Seder of the Kohen Gadol as far as his special avoda of Yom Kippur. And he was quarantined in the Lishkas HaFarhedrin for 1 full week in preparation for Yom Kippur. What happened during that week? That's what this Mishnah addresses. Masrulosh, you can add the word shnei here, we'll see about that. Zikenim mizikei bezdin. They appointed 2 elders who were scholars and members of the High Court, and they were designated to spend that week in the company of the Kohen Gadol. And when it says Zikenim, the word Zikenim in this context says the Rashash means 2 Talmidei Chachamim, 2 scholars, and they were now going to accompany the Kohen Gadol for this week. What did they do? What did these Ziknei Bezdin intend to accomplish? Now, usually, I have to tell you in Talmud, when we hear about Ziknei Bezdin, the elders of the court, we're speaking about some very complicated issues, some rulings of an esoteric nature. Why do we need Ziknei Bezdin to be the entourage, so to speak, of the Kohen Gadol for this week? And not only that, the Mishnah says, you know what they did for that week? Korim lefanav b'seder hayom. They would read the sequence of Karbanos from Parshas Achrei Mos. So first of all, Korin means Kriya, means reading Torah Sh'B'Tzav. And not only that, Seder Hayom means they would go into some of the nuances and the minute details about the sequence of the Avodah to teach the Kohen Gadol so that he would be very meticulous about the Seder. The Gemara is not going to be happy with this. The Kohen Gadol was a scholar. He wasn't appointed as a Kohen Gadol unless he was greater in Chachma than everybody. And for sure, he knew the Avodas Yom Kippur. Did we need Ziknei Bezdin to waste that time for an entire week and review the laws of the Seder Avodas Yom Kippur? That's going to be the Gemara's problem. V'omrim lo. And this is what these elders say. Ishi. Ishi means Adoni, my master. Kohen Gadol. Kra tabeficha. It would be a better idea if you read. You know, it's very interesting when you have a chavrusa with someone, very often one is more scholarly on a higher level than the other. Who should do the reading? The answer is let the lower level person do the reading so that it sinks into his brain. He's active instead of passive. So Kohen Gadol, you know what? We want to convey the Seder Hayom to you. Make sure you have it. It should be in your back pocket. You should know it like this. You do the reading. And Shema Shachachta. Maybe if you forgot the Seder Hayom, you don't remember the sequence of the Karbanos of this day. Oh, Shema Lo Lamanit. Could you imagine? This is what we call Yiddish Stelzach. Imagine, to ta'er latzmecha, the Kohen Gadol never learned the laws of Avodas Yom Kippur. It's wild. It's bonkers. The man, for a whole year, is waiting for that central role that he plays. He's a great scholar. He was appointed as the Chacham to be Me'al on top of all the Kohen. He oversees all their avodah the whole year round. Now we're coming to Yom Kippurim. We need Ziknei Bezdin because Shema Lo Lamadta, you never learned the laws of the Avodas Yom Kippurim, most of which are included in Torah Shebetzav in the Parsha of Achrei Mos. What are we talking to, a 5-year-old? We talking to some sort of ignoramus? All right. All this takes us to Erev Yom Kippur. Now, what happens on Erev Yom Kippur? We're getting really close to the avodah. The first thing we want to guarantee is that the Kohen Gadol is absolutely familiar with those animals that are brought for the various respective korbanos. Ma'amidin oso b'shara mizrach, we set him up in the eastern entrance, which is the main entrance into the Azara. Umavirin lefanav parim v'elim ukvasim. We bring in front of him the cows and the rams and the lambs. Kedeshe makir v'ragil ba'avodah. Now here we have a machlokes how to interpret this Mishnah. According to most of the Mefarshim, it says ma'avirin lefanav parim, cows. These were not the cows that were designated for example, paro shel kohen gadol, etc., etc. Any cow, just that he should be familiar with what a cow looks like. The Maharsha, on the other hand, says no. That even though it says the word parim, the reason why it says parim is because there were different parim that he had to bring on Yom Kippur. But these were the exact animals that he had to slaughter and bring on the Mizbeach on Yom Kippur. These very animals. It wasn't just an animal from a herd, a random selection. There was paro, lechatos, there was a paro li'ola, and that was part of the Musaf service. There were elim, like for example, there was his ayil, his ram, there was ayil ha'am. And all these were brought in front of him. In fact, the Musaf service required 7 kvasim, 7 lambs. Those 7 lambs were passed by him on Erev Yom Kippur. That's the way the Maharsha learns this Mishnah. And now we get to the dietary section of this Mishnah, which is going to occupy us in the Gemara for a long time. A lot about diets here, what he should be eating and what he should not be eating on Erev Yom Kippur. Kol Shivas Yomim, Lo Hayumonim Imenu Machalu Mishnah. There were no strict dietary restrictions during the 7 days until we get to Erev Yom Kippur. He can eat what he wants, when he wants. But Erev Yom Kippur Chashech, when the night of Erev Yom Kippur began, 24 hours before the avodah, then we have to be strict about what he eats. And here we have to add what the Gemara is going to tell us, that Hashena mevia lidei tuma v'yiposel me'avod. What we're trying to avoid here are foods that make him tired. And if he gets tired, then he might become tameh during his sleep, which is what we call in English a nocturnal emission. So why is it that we wait till Erev Yom Kippur to be strict about his diet to avoid those kinds of foods? Why not during the rest of the week? And the answer is simple. that if he becomes a Balkari and he sees an emission, then he's Tovil on that very same day, and with Hariv Shemesh, with sunset, he's Tah. Then it would not in any way disqualify him from the Avodah. But when we get to Erev Yom Kippur, if he, over that night of Erev Yom Kippur, when he wakes up the next morning, which is 12 hours before he starts the Avodah of Yom Kippur, and he finds that he has Keri, he won't be able to be Torah on time. So we have to be very careful on Erev Yom Kippur to avoid any possibility of Tumah. So what do? We require a strict diet. The Gemara is going to spend a lot of time working out this diet. The Gemara says the following: Bishlei Meshacha Shem Meshachach L'chai. L'chai means yes. I find that clear. It's very possible that the Kohen Gadol, it's been 365 days since the last Yom Kippur. He may have forgotten some of the nuances and the details of the Avodas Yom Kippurim. Let's give him a thorough review lesson for 7 days under the supervision of 2 Talmidei Chachamim Ziknei Bezdin. Elashem Lolavat? Are you telling me that the Kohen Gadol is a total ignoramus? He never learned anything? Would we have ever appointed an ignoramus as the Kohen Gadol of Asanya? The Bryce is going to list 4 critical requirements of the profile of the Kohen Gadol. You want to apply for the job? Give us a CV, and in your profile, make sure that you can check off the following 4 points. He is considered by the Torah Gadol Me'achav. What's greater about him than all his fellow Kohanim? Number 1, She'ehei Gadol Me'achav B'koach. He's got amazing stamina. He's got a power that almost sounds like adrenaline. B'nai, he's a handsome, comely fellow. B'chachma, that's the one we want to emphasize. He's got a superior wisdom. He's a scholar, he's got knowledge. And finally, B'ocha. And he's got to be independent, so to speak, financially independent and wealthy. And here we have a great insight of the Karban Aaron, one of the commentaries on the Mishnayos. And he goes through these 4 qualities and prerequisites of the Kohen Gadol. Number 1, koach. He says the Kohen, as the chief, the Kohen HaGadol, who has to oversee all the operation in the Beis HaMikdash, 365 days of a year. He is the manig, he is a leader par excellence. He is Torah, constantly putting in effort in the Avodas HaKodshin. In the Mikdash, that's where he is the leader. He has to have koach. And I'm not sure if that koach is what you would normally call physical koach or stamina. I have a feeling, again, this is just what my intuition tells me, that this koach comes from some higher source. Number 2, no, you know what? It's important that the other Kohanim treat him with a certain respect, a certain awe. He's got to be becoming, he's got to have a presence. It doesn't say, by the way, that he is tall. It says that he's good looking. My father, of Shalom, again, it's going to be hard for the South Africans to understand this. My father was 5 feet 4 inches. Can you figure that out? In how much is that in your?
It means he was short.
What?
He was not a tall man.
No. Okay, so that you got that point. In fact, when my father used to speak at the podium, where he rabbinated for half a century, they brought him a little platform that gave him an extra 3 inches. And not only that, he wore something called Adler shoes. I don't know if you ever heard that. That's a company. Adler shoes had a little insert in it, which you didn't see from the outside. It gave you another 2 inches. So my father looked like a tall man, like he was 5'8". When he was studying in yeshiva, preparing for the rabbinate, I don't know if the name will mean anything to you, but Dr. Bernard Revel, who was the first president of Yeshiva University, he said to my father, the rabbinate is not for you. I'm from Texas, he said. He was a Texan. In Texas, everyone was very tall. He said, the rabbinate is for tall people. You have to be a tall rabbi. You're only 5'4". So my father said, I'm going to prove him wrong. And he became one of the most important rabbis in America. He's written up in all the history books. But you've got to have a certain presence. I remember the next door shul in the next neighborhood over, which was on King's Highway, was Rabbi Chill. Rabbi Chill, close chum of my father's, they both spoke the same Lithuanian Yiddish. Rabbi Chill was close to 6 feet tall. And his shul had pews on both sides going up and down. He stood right in the middle. I remember coming to hear him speak on Shabbos. And he had his tallis over his head. And he would swing his arms out like this. I mean, it was like very dramatic, you know. So that's called Nod. Number 3, Chachma. He has to be the Kohen Gadol wise. He's going to have to make decisions on the spot that are relevant to the Beis HaMikdash. And finally, Osher. He has enough money that he doesn't have to depend upon anyone else. He doesn't have to have any fear that maybe he's insulting his donors. On the contrary, they should realize that they have to have awe of him and not the other way around. But he's got to be a chacham. Acherim omim, minayin shem elo. If the Kohen Gadol has no money, she'echav hakohanim megadlin also. Then if he has all the other qualities, except he doesn't have bucks, so that the Kohanim have to give him money to make sure that he has that last qualification. There's an active requirement to set up the Kohen Gadol as above all the other Kohen. In any event, our Mishnah remains very difficult. How can it be that they set up 2 Ziknei Bezdin because the Kohen Gadol never learned the halachas? And now we're going to learn a very, very difficult piece of Jewish history. There actually was a long period of Jewish history in which the Kohanim Gedolim in the holy Beis HaMikdash were ignoramuses. Omer Rav Yosef lo kasha kan b'mikdash rishon, kan b'mikdash sheni. In Mikdash Rishon, the only need to attach to Zikanim was because maybe he forgot. He needs a refresher course. After all, it's been a year. We all forget. It's human. But there was no need to teach him anything that he didn't know. Review, yes. Teaching, no. But then there was Bayis Sheni. And Bayis Sheni was a terrible period of time, especially for the institution of the Kohen Gadol, the Kahuna Gadol. And the Gemara tells us that Kohanim Gedolim used to buy their way into the job. They would bribe the Malchus because it was an officially recognized position and you had to get the okay of the Melech. And Bayis Sheni was a period of ignorance, a period of poverty, a period of religious persecution. Do you gentlemen know that the menorah in Bayis Rishon
I don't hear.
You don't hear. Something went off here.
Okay.
Okay. I think it was your camera. I don't know. Maybe it was.
Oh, maybe.
Did you know They used gold to make the menorah in the Bais Rishon. Bais Sheni, the Gemara says, the menorah was made of wood. They couldn't afford gold. The Gemara in Tainus tells us they couldn't afford a cup of wine to make Havdalah on Motzi Shabbos during Bais Sheni. What they needed was to institute another Havdalah in Tefillah, in Ma'ariv, because they weren't able to recite Ma'ariv Havdalah, on a cup of wine. That's how bad the poverty was. And after the great miracle of Hanukkah, the reason why Hanukkah is such a great miracle is because it took place during that terribly dark period of Bais Sheni. And afterwards, tremendous divisions, splinter groups, Chashmonaim this way, that way. The Omer of Asi, Tarkava de Dinri, Ailila Marta Barbaitus Liyanaya Malka, a very rich widow who lost her husband and inherited a massive amount of funds. She was Martha, the first Martha. Marta Barbaitus. She paid Irkava de Dinre, 3 kavim's worth of gold coins to Yanai Hamelech. For what? Al de Ukme Lioshua ben Gamla bekahani Ravrave, to achieve the appointment of her new husband, a second husband, whose name was Yeshua ben Gamla. She bought the position. She bribed it for her husband. Now Chazal say, how could Yeshua ben Gamla become the Kohen Gadol and be married to an almana? Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry an almana. So Chazal tell us, Gemara in Yevamos, that he had married her before he became Kohen Gadol, but it was only Nesuin. And then after he was appointed as a Kohen Gadol, he took her into the chuppah, which was okay, because he was already married to her, technically with Kedusha. But in any event, Yoshua ben Gamla, Kohen Gadol, how much did he know? He knew enough for his wife to pay 3 kavim of dinrei zav to buy the position for him. That's how much he knew. And that was unfortunately typical of the high priesthood during the period of the Second Commonwealth, the Second Temple. Tosfos mentions the names of 18 Kohanim Gedolim who were not Sdukin, one of the great splinter groups off the main path, was a movement called it Stukin. Later on, they became the Karaim. They denied Torah Sheba'al Peh. And out of the period of 4 centuries of Bais Sheni, there were only 18 Kohanim Gedolim who were not Stukin. And most of them served a very short service in the temple. It's interesting, Tosfos mentions the names of many of them. And the name that keeps reappearing is Azariah. I was very happy about that. It means Azariah was on the good side, the right side. Anyway. So this was the matzah of the situation of Bais Sheni. Now here we have a very interesting issue amongst the Rishonim. Do you know today we have an educational system for children, Jewish children? Does anybody know who founded the entire system? It's a Gemara Bava Basra. It was Yoshua ben Gamla, right off Rabbi Meir Street. That's where I live. Yoshua ben Gamla, Zocher Latov. The Gemara says we remember him for good because he was the one who instituted an educational system, a school system. Before Yoshua ben Gamla, either you taught your son, homeschooled, or you didn't teach your son. And Yeshua ben Gamla saw what a terrible situation it was. So he created an entire sophisticated school system. And every city had to have its own malamed. And there were funds that were gathered together and contributed in order to sustain the educational system. And to this day, we attribute our sense of gratitude for the educational system in Israel to Yeshua ben Gamla. Setosa says, maybe he did tshuva. He was not such a hotsy-totsy guy when he bribed his way into the position of Kohen Gadol. But later he did tshuva. But then Tosa says, no. There were two people with the same name, Yeshua ben Gamla. So I'm hoping that the street that crosses over to Rabbi Meir, Yeshua ben Gamla, is the right Yeshua ben Gamla, not the wrong Yeshua ben Gamla. Erev Yom Kippur Shachris. They set up the Kohen Gadol and Erev Yom Kippur at the Shara Mizrach, and they bring in front of him the Purim, the Elim, the Kvasim. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Af HaSeirim. Interesting, the Mishnah leaves out the Seirim. We know that the goats played a major role on Yom Kippurim. V'tana didan my time alotoni Seirim. Why did our Mishnah omit Seirim, the goats? So the Gemara answers, the Tanav Mishnah came on. He's of the opinion the Seirim al Chet Ka'asu. The purpose of the Seirim was to achieve kapara for the sins of Israel. Chol Shadaita. If we would pass these Seirim in front of the Kohen Gadol on Erev Yom Kippur, he would have Chalisha Sadas. He would be overwhelmed by the challenge that he faces. He'd be aware of the fact that everything now is contingent, depends on him. All the responsibility is his. The sins of Israel and the atonement thereof is his responsibility. And a person doesn't always believe in themselves. And this would play on that subtle part of the heart, the emotional feelings of the Kohen Gadol, that maybe he won't be able to do the job. And he's going to doubt himself. Miodea im tuchal kaparoso lios al yoda. Can the kapara that's meant to be achieved by these seirim be achieved through his activity, through his avodah? And here we have a very big question of the Balei Tosfos and the Meiri and the Piskei Arid. If we're worried about Chalisha Sadas, which would mean that the Kohen Gadol is worried about that lashon, that crimson ribbon that was attached to the sayir, to the goat, that was pushed off the edifice, that maybe it would not turn white, and he would be responsible. So the question is, what about the Elim? It says that they passed in front of him the rams. The Elim, it says in the Pasuk, the Yotza v'Osa Solosa v'Olas Ha'am. These are the two karbanos ola that are brought Elim. Elim meaning rams. V'Kiper bi'ado u'bi'ad ha'am. The Elim were there for kapara. So the Gvuras Ari, one of the super commentaries on Masechet Yoma, he says that the Elim is not a problem. Why? Because the Elim are Karbanos Ola. And the Gemara tells us that Ola is Machaper on Mitzvahs Aseh, non-fulfillment of a positive command. Whereas the Seirim are Machaper on violations of Lotas. So that there's a low profile with regard to Olos. We're not dreaming of great achievements of the Ola on the highest level of Kapara. The Kohen Gadol was fine with that. But the Gemara asks, the Hochi Par Nami. The Gemara objects, how could we pass the par in front of the Kohen Gadol? I'll chetu the Asa. The par was brought to atone for the sins of the Kohen Gadol and his fellow Kohanim. Why weren't we afraid of Chalisha Sadas? He's going to be overwhelmed with the responsibility. Doubt himself. Says the Gemara, one thing the Kohen Gadol had confidence in. He could have an impact on sinners and bring them to a state of tshuva, but only if he's aware of their sins. Par, kevan di olav, it's an atonement for his own sins. V'al echav hakohanim hu diasi, and to bring an atonement for the sins of his fellow colleagues, his kohanim, is the echav hakohanim ika inshi de ispe milsa. If there are kohanim who are guilty of sin, may the yodle. He knows about it. Umahadale b'tshuva. These are three of the most amazing words that I've ever seen in the Talmud. Umahadale b'tshuva. Hu yachzirenu l'tshuva. He'll be able to uplift them. This was Aaron HaKohen. This was the love of the Kohen, one for the other. And in the case of the Kohen Gadol, it's special love. But Bekulo Yisrael. But when it comes to the Seirim that are meant to bring about a kapar for all of Israel, Lo Yada, he couldn't identify the sinners of Israel. He didn't know exactly who is guilty of sin. Not every sin is public knowledge, you know. The people of Israel didn't publicize the sin. They kept it on the QT. How could he be machzor them b'tshuva? He didn't even know and wasn't even aware of their sins. And therefore, showing him the Seirim, Erev Yom Kippur, right before he goes in to Yom Kippur, that could have a depressing impact on the Kohen Gadol, who might doubt his ability to rise to the occasion, to bring about a kapara through the Seirim for Gans Klal Yisrael. Amar Avina, Hainu Diamri Inshi, this idea that the Kohen Gadol knows, he's aware of the sins of his fellow Kohanim, is brought about expressed by an idiomatic phrase that people use, a popular expression. If the son of your sister, meaning your nephew, who's a close relative, is the Shoter HaMelech, he is in charge of collecting taxes. So your nephew is the tax collector for the government. He's got to bring in as many tax monies as he possibly can. And the king is on top of him. Bring me money. Is Beshuka Kame Lo Tachlis. If you, the uncle, have bucks, you're a rich guy, don't show up in the proximity of your nephew, who's the chief tax collector, because he knows exactly how much money you're worth. And that means that people who are related to each other, they're cousins, they're close relatives, they more or less know who are the rich guys and who are the poor fellows. And in the same way, says Ravina, the Kohen Gadol knew amongst his fellow Kohanim, his cousins and other relatives, which were the sinners and what sins they committed and why they needed a kapara, and he would be able to bahadole b'tshuva, to bring them to do tshuva. All Shiva Sayomim Lo Hayumonim. Now we get to the last part of the Mishnah, which I call the dietary part of the Mishnah. During the 7-day period of quarantine, as far as food is concerned, laissez-faire, let the Kohen Gadol eat whatever he pleases. However, Erev Yom Kippur, when it gets dark, we're not going to let him eat too much. He should have a skimpy diet. The more you eat, the tighter you get. And if you sleep, you might have a tumas keri, a nocturnal emission. And now the Gemara quotes a machlokes regarding which foods should be given, should be fed to the Kohen Gadol on Erev Yom Kippur, and which should not. Tanya, we learned in the Bryce from Yehuda ben Nekosa Omer, Machilin Oso, you know what we should give him to eat on Erev Yom Kippur? Slatos, those are foods made with refined flour, ubeitzim and eggs. Kidei lemasmiso, we want to give him a diet that will clean out his system, if you know what I mean. What's called in Hebrew l'shalshel. It's like, I don't know if you've ever taken a colonoscopy. So before you go in for a colonoscopy, I use Dr. Paz. He knows my insides very well. So you clean out the system. So according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Nekosa, these are the foods that will clean out the system. They're sort of laxatives, if you know what I mean. And the reason why we want to clean out of his system is because tomorrow on Yom Kippur, we don't want him to have to run around having to eliminate bowel movements and interfere with his avoda. So let's clean out his system, his intestines, on Erev Yom Kippur. L'shal shalom. Amru lo. The Chachamim disagreed with Rabbi Yehuda. He says, these foods, like slatos and beitzim, are foods that warm up the body. What does that mean, they warm up the body? It means they're marbe zera. They increase his zera, and therefore increase the likelihood that he'll have a nocturnal emission. So these are foods that should be avoided, because if he becomes tamei overnight, he will not be able to serve as the Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash. There's no time for Tara. And Tanya, we find this in a brisa that we should avoid giving him eggs, for example. Sumchus omer b'nei Rebbe machilino so lo abi v'amri lo abavi v'yesh omer af lo yayin lovan. What are these things? Lo abi is aleph, beis, yud is esrog, beitzim, and yayin yoshan. And these are various foods that are marbe zera. Amrile and others say ababi, which means that to the esrog, the beitzim, and the basar. I'm sorry, we had esrog, beitzim, and yayin, and now we're going to add basar. The beis, basar shamen, very thick meat, very oily, fatty meat. Yesh omrim af lo yayin lovan. And in this particular presentation, they add yayin lovan. Why? Mipnei sheyayin lovan also mevias adam lituma, and that would increase the probability of his having an emission, of becoming a Balkari of Tumas Keri. Now the Gemara, in terms of diets, makes a very sharp move. An analogy, in order to derive which foods should be excluded from the diet of the Kohen Gadol on Erev Yom Kippur, an analogy to the laws of a zav. A zav has an emission from that member of the body, and it goes in 3 stages. Stage number 1, which is called Re'iyah Rishona. The first time he sees this substance coming out of his body, the Gemara later is going to describe the substance, then he is tamei only for that day, and it matters not why he had a nocturnal emission. The Gemara is going to go into great detail about the causes of nocturnal emission. And there's something called a re'iyah ba'ones, which literally means circumstances beyond his control. What it really means is that if there are external reasons that have nothing to do with the internal function of the body that cause this irregularity to see this emission of ziva. And those external causes, in modern Hebrew we call them sibot chitzoniot, are all classified under onus. The first re'iyah that the Zav sees of ziva is mitame him even ba'onus. And that would add or be integrated, if you will, with the second re'iyah, if he has a second re'iyah. And after that, he needs what's called Zayin Nikir, 7 days in which he sees no ziva at all. Then, if he sees a third re'iyah, he has to bring a carbon, but that chiyuv carbon for the third re'iyah is only if the third re'iyah is internal, meaning the cause is internal, as opposed to an external cause, which we said was onus. So onus on the third re'iyah will eliminate that third re'iyah from integration into the other two to be mechayev him a carbon. Now, as far as re'iyah shni is concerned, the second re'iyah must be a re'iyah without onus. If it's attributable to some external conditions that cause the re'iyah, the ziva, then it's not mitame at all. So it comes out the following. Let's just try to summarize the rules and regulations that govern ziva. With regard to re'iyah rishona, the re'iyah rishona, even ba'ones, will be integrated to create a re'iyah shniya. The re'iyah shniya will not be integrated unless it's not an onus. And if the first re'iyah was an onus and the second was not, the third re'iyah would not generate a carbon because the first re'iyah, insofar as it was ba'onus, cannot be integrated into the chiyuv carbon, even though the first re'iyah is mitamehim for a 1-day tumah of ziva. The second re'iyah, which if it wasn't ba'onus, even though the previous re'iyah was ba'onus, is going to generate a requirement of zayin nikiyim. And now the Mishnah wants to know, what is a re'iyah ba'onus? And there are a number of cases of re'iyah ba'onus where we attribute the ziva to external causes. And one of them is achila ushasiya. What a person eats and drinks could cause, as an onus, a re'iyas ziva. Tana Rabbanan, zav, tolin lo b'maichal. We can reclassify and define that re'iyah as a re'iyah ba'ones, ba'ochel. Meaning, if he overate, no matter what type of food, but he just overate, and bechol minei machal, no matter what he ate. This overeating, which again, the cardiologist will tell you what damage you cause when you overeat, and the gastro people will tell you. But now the ziva people are going to tell you that it's going to cause ziva. So that's called tliya. Tolin, tliya. Tolin means that we can attribute his ziva to some sort of external cause. It's not some sort of malfunction of the system, which would be ziva and be mitame in all circumstances, but rather he did something unusual and that changed the system in such a way that now he sees a ziva. That's called tolin. Elazar ben Pinchas Homer Mishum Rav Yehuda ben Beseira Ein Machilin Oso. Now, if you recall, once he gets to the second riyah, he needs Zayin Nikiyim. So if he wants to extricate himself from this tumah ziva, he's got to be very careful that he doesn't have another emission, another ziva. So therefore, we're going to be very strict about his diet. And we're not going to feed him lo chagvi, velo gabam, velo kol dvarim hamevim lidei tuma. In other words, we don't want him to see an emission that now will undermine his Zayin Nikiyim. Lo chagvi, lo chalav, velo gvina, velo beitza, velo yayin. These four categories of food will cause ziva. And therefore, by analogy, we want to avoid the Kohen Gadol indulging in these foods or in this wine on Erev Yom Kippur. So the parallel here is two scenarios, two situations in which we want to avoid any kind of eating, drinking that could bring to a nocturnal emission. Case number one is the Zav during Zayin Nikiyah, and case number two is the Kohen Gadol on Erev Yom Kippur. Lo Gabam, may grisim shel pol. So this is a kind of a bean, ubasar shemain, and fatty meat. Murios is the oil that comes from fish oil. And then it says at the end of this whole list, apparently there's another group of foods that should be avoided. That which we learned in the Brisa, we have to avoid feeding this to a Zav during the Zayin Nikiyim, the Eluhem. Hashum, garlic, and now we turn to Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. Vehashachalayim, he writes here, Shem Tzemach, it's a name of a vegetation, Sha'olav Uzrav Hayu Necholim. They would eat the leaves and the seeds. In the English translation, he calls it cress, C-R-E-S-S. So we'll Google that and figure out what it is, but it's some sort of a tzemach. And then we have chalaglagos. And in the English translation, it's called purslane. In the Hebrew, he says it's a tzemach shenikra ben chardal. So somehow it belongs to the mustard family. But beitzim vehar gargir. Gargir again. In the Hebrew, he talks about some sort of a drug-like vegetation. In the English, he calls it racket. I don't know what racket is. If somebody would kindly do some research on racket, we get a what is the name of that encyclopedia? You know, they give you, look up racket. Again, you might find Sylvester Stallone, a rocket. I don't know who's a rocket or rocket chips. I don't know. Rocket. But don't make a racket, make a rocket. A rocket is apparently a growth of vegetation. And it's something that could cause a nocturnal emission. You don't want to eat it while you're a Zav waiting for Zayin Nikiyim or a Kohen Gadol waiting to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. And now the Gemara talks about this entity called a rocket, a gargir. The pasuk says in Malachim, "Vayetze echad v'lasadel laket oros." He went out to collect in the fields oros. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Mishmei Rabbi Meir, ze gargir. Why is the biblical term for gargir oros, lights? Rabbi Yochanan, Lama Nikra Shman Oros, Shemeiros Esainayim. Good for the eyes. It's also good for emissions. Rav Huna Hamotzi Gargir. If you find this rocket, then im Yochel Yochlo Ochlo. He's recommended to eat it because it's very healthy for the eyes. Im Lav.
Bye-bye.
If he can't eat it, then Mavir al Gabi Einov, at least put it over his eyes. That green one?
Yeah.
Very beautiful. Wow. Can you smoke it? I mean, can you give me a piece to eat? Papa. The Gargira meets Runamum. Interesting. This Gargir grows the Mesa. Mesa means on the boundaries of a field. He writes in the Hebrew, it's so isolated. It's on the outskirts of the border of a field that there are no other plants that draw the nourishment around it. So it has a full power, and that can influence your eyes. And as we said before, the Gargir is called in Hebrew a Ben Chardal. So let's just summarize what we have here. As far as Kohen Gadol is concerned, we're not going to feed him not esrogim, not beitzim, not fatty meat, not old wine or new wine, not saltos, not refined flour, things are made of flour. As far as Zav is concerned, during his Zayin Akiyim, Ein Lachilo, we don't feed him chalav, kvina, beitzim, yayin, megrisim, shalpul, basa shamein, morius, shum, shachalayim, chalgolgolos, and gargi. Now, there are a number of things that are not listed on the Zav list that appear on the Kohen Gadol list. For example, we don't find esrog or saltos on the list, the avoid the following food list for a Zav. So the Siach Yitzchak, one of the super commentators on Yoma, says that's why the Brisa ends up with the words Kol advarim meviim lidei tuma, to include also an esrog and saltos. Now in Kohen Gadol, it doesn't mention anything about avoiding milk, cheese, megrisim shalpul, morio, shum, shachalayim, etc., etc. Why aren't these included in the list of the Kohen Gadol? So the Meiri writes, Af Kohen Gadol lo lachilo b'kol ha'machalim amur b'sugya, and the Gemara, according to the Meiri, is relying on the fuller list that was offered with regard to the Zav, but certainly we should apply that list. These are the foods to be avoided in the diet of the Kohen Gadol on Erev Yom HaKippur. So it's very interesting that if we were in the kashrus business, we'd have to have a special list of kosher foods for the Kohen Gadol on Erev Yom HaKippur. All right, this is where we're going to stop here. Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav. I guess we'll continue in Mitzvah Shem on the Yom Revi'i after Chag. By that time, we'll be well into the Omer. So I'll see you then. And thank you as always.
Everybody.
Kosher v'sameach, and just avoid these foods, okay?